As always, today's video does contain disturbing content and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you want to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And thank you. This happened probably about 14 years ago, when I was 17. I was in university in California. I graduated high school early, so I started at university early. And I used to go to a local Starbucks by my campus in my free time to study, because it was hard for me to focus at home. I remember this older guy used to come in a lot and just sit alone at a table, always facing me, with one small coffee. And he would just stare. It made me deeply uncomfortable, but I was too young to think about reporting it because I didn't think there was anything to report. He was just staring, not approaching me or anything. In fact, I thought that some of it was in my head. I began to notice that sometimes he would leave around the same time that I did. With this Starbucks, the parking was mostly in the ground level of a free parking structure that was around the corner from the shop. It was usually super easy to get a spot right in the front, so you could actually see your car from the street in the structure. I usually parked there and never felt particularly unsafe, except when I would realize that he was following me out. I began to note what his car looked like and where he would park. It would usually be a little away from me, and I would wait for him to leave before I went anywhere, because I didn't want him following me. One afternoon, though, I was heading to my car and I noticed that he had parked right next to me. The passenger side of the car was by my driver's side, and it was very close. I didn't see him, but I remember just having the most awful feeling in the pit of my stomach when I realized he had parked so close. I rushed to get into my car, and it was at that moment that I shut the door that I realized he was following me, and approaching the driver's side door of my vehicle. He had gotten as far as the door when I quickly locked it, and thankfully I did it fast enough because he tried to open my door a second later. I immediately backed out of that spot and floored it out of the structure. I got caught at a red light outside of the structure though, which gave this guy enough time to catch up to me in his car. I honestly don't know why I didn't call the cops at this moment. I remember trying to rationalize what was going on in my head and thinking maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing, even though the man had just literally tried to open my car door. I know, it's stupid, but I was 17. If it were me now at 31, you bet I would have driven straight to the nearest police station. Thankfully, though, I was aware enough that I needed to lose him before I went home, so I turned into a series of residential streets to see if he would follow. He did. I just sped up and made a bunch of random turns until I was sure that I lost him. Then, I drove home, and I never went back to that Starbucks again. I don't want to think about what would have happened had I not been quick enough to lock my door or lose him. I think about this a lot, and I truly think that I might have stopped a kidnapping just by being in a parked car. My ex-boyfriend lived with me for over a year, and there was a period of time where his truck was acting up, so I would pick him up from work. He worked just down the road from my place at a liquor store, so he would get out around 10 p.m. on weeknights. One night he asks me to pick him up, and I agree. I get all swaddled in my pajamas and drive down to grumpily wait for him since my bedtime was 10 p.m. due to my job. I parked my car in the small parking lot out front. His liquor store is sandwiched between an adult shop and a head shop. Party Central, I guess. By now, the head shop and liquor store are closed, so their thirds of the lots are mostly empty. The adult shop only had one other car in front of it. Outside the liquor store is my car, and one other, so 3 total cars, with a woman standing outside of it, sitting on her hood. I don't think much of it. Maybe she's waiting for someone in the adult shop or one of my ex's coworkers and just relaxing in the summer night air. I sit hunched in my seat, car off, playing on my phone. I notice a white van. I know, cliched, but that's why I noticed it. Pull into the lot. It drives through slowly, and then back out onto the main road. Weird, but maybe they wanted alcohol and saw the store was closed. Whatever. I go back to my phone, but I glance at the woman. She's still outside of her car, but she's moved between my car and hers. I had parked a couple spots over, so close, but not too close. I go back to my phone. The same white van pulls in again and stops in front of her. I sit up slightly to watch. I'm a true crime nut, what can I say? I'm easily alerted. And I watch some guy roll down the van window and lean out to talk to the woman. I pull out my phone to snap a photo of the license plates, again, just in case, but I can't see it. So I turn on my car and go to open the door, but the guy in the van instantly pulls away and leaves. The woman moves closer to my car as I get out and approach her. I ask her what was that, and she says she doesn't know. He was trying to ask her for directions, but he stopped mid-sentence when I turned on my car. I ask her if she's waiting for anyone, and she says, kinda. She's been sitting outside the liquor store for 3 hours waiting on a tow truck because she locked her keys inside her car, and she couldn't leave the car because her puppy was in the back seat. Thankfully, it wasn't a hot night. It was a very nice night, so she was waiting for a tow truck. As her and I are talking, my ex comes out and asks what's up, so we decide to help her since there was no freaking way I was leaving her alone. I have some rope in my car for emergencies, and my ex uses it to basically jimmy her door open, make a lasso, and hook it around her door lock and pull it up to unlock it. It works, and we open the door just as the tow truck pulls in. Her puppy is safe, we wish her well, and I get back in the car and tell my ex, I think I almost watched her get kidnapped. It was Christmas time, and I remember that I had broken my ankle prior to this, so I was wearing my cast at this point. The doctors gave me this shoe thing so I could walk without crutches. My cast was bright pink, which, looking back, why? Anyways, my parents and I were going Christmas shopping at Target, but we ended up literally buying some socks and shampoo. Not much. We didn't even get any gifts, so it was a waste of time. So we paid and we were leaving when I saw this male just staring at our car. We had parked in a semi-empty area, and there were only a couple of cars. Like, he wasn't looking inside and snooping around the car, he was just standing straight staring at the right side of the car. Now, at that time, we had this beige-brown color Ford Explorer. It was a 2002, so I'm confused and we didn't have anything inside at all, so I was even more creeped out. Now, I wanted to go back and get a security guard, but my dad said that it was fine and he'll tell him to move, and told me to get in the left side. I usually sit on the right side, so yeah. Now, we got there and this dude did not move. Even when my dad told him to move, he just stood and stared inside. My mom just said to get in the car quickly, and we did. We all got in and the man just stood there and kept staring inside. I felt his gaze on me because he was staring at the right side behind the driver's seat, so since I got in, he was staring at me. But I didn't look. I just looked ahead of me, and at this point, I was kind of scared that my dad was going to hit him, because he was pretty close. So My dad backs up and is turning to get out of the parking lot when we see the guy move and open the left side door of the car. At that point, I screamed, and my dad just sped off. And when he did, the door closed because he turned, and my heart was pounding. As we sped off, we saw him just stand there and start moving towards the entrance of Target. Now, I literally was having so many thoughts in my head, like, oh my god, what if he put a GPS tracker or something on our car? Because we didn't know how long he had just been standing there. But my parents were like, no, I don't think so, he was probably just some creep. That night I prayed. I was like, Lord, please don't let him track us and stuff like that. I was terrified. Besides being scared and creeped out, well, we were fine. The next day, my parents had work, and they would usually take me since it was a Sunday. Well, to get there, we had to pass the same Target, and when we did, we saw an empty parking lot with that same blonde, long-haired white guy. When I say my heart stopped, I was terrified. Even my parents were shocked, and he was just there staring as we drove by. After that, we never saw him again. Now, this may have been 6 years ago, but oh my god, that was so scary and creepy, and I never want to meet that guy again. And yes, we still go to that Target, but we make sure to park where there are lots of cars. Hi. Just to give some description about myself, I'm a 20-year-old female. I'm fairly short, and because of my appearance, I often get mistaken for a minor. I live in a somewhat small town in California, and this town isn't really all that safe, but then again, most places aren't either. This happened when I was 19, by the way, just to clarify. Back to the story. When I used to live in my previous house before getting kicked out by my D-bag landlord uncle, we didn't do anything bad, he just wanted money for himself. What a guy. I had a friend over that night. He was a good friend. I let him crash at my place because he didn't want to go back to his household from how insanely toxic and dysfunctional it was, but anyways, I let him stay. We had this idea to go to our local 7-Eleven that was right up the street from my neighborhood. It was about a 9-minute walk. When we went out, it was pitch black outside. And I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would you be outside walking at 3 a.m.? I'm not sure. We just wanted some snacks and some drinks since we were watching a movie, or a show, I can't remember. But all I remember is that it was long. And the walk up there was decent, and nothing creepy happened. But hey, walking out in the middle of the night can be creepy, but I'm glad that I had someone with me. When we made it up there, we grabbed what we came up there for, which was a couple of sodas and some chips. We paid for our snacks and left. That's simple, right? So, when we walked out of the 7-Eleven, there were a few ways that you could get to my house. The first was down the street, next to a church, which was initially a safe path to walk, I guess. And the other was down a neighborhood that was just creepy. And I don't know why I did this, but I decided for us to take that path to go back home. After walking through the neighborhood, we walked past this elementary school. Now, I know this is weird and it could be a guy just taking a midnight run since I know some people actually do that, but this guy wearing a blue shirt and black basketball shorts literally booked it like he was running for his life, or like he was running away from someone. I could just tell. It was like a gut feeling. He disappeared into the dark elementary school and never returned. He probably just kept running, or maybe was hiding from someone, I'm not sure, but after he ran off, there was this shady-looking car that just sat there for a moment and drove off. Fast forward, my friend and I sat on a bench next to one of our local high schools. We sat there to sit for a moment and just talked about some things. I can't remember what. So here's the weirdest freaking thing. That shady looking car from earlier apparently followed us, parked on the curb, and these three shady as hell looking men opened the car doors and almost came out. They didn't see my friend until I jumped off the bench, and that's when they saw him. My friend is pretty tall and intimidating, so I guess when they saw him with me, they got back in their dinky looking car and drove off. I wish I was making this up, like some weird story, but no. This was a real encounter that did happen to me. We did make it home safe after all that happened, and vowed to never walk in the middle of the night to go anywhere. It was a better idea to have just went during the day, but I was pretty stupid. Again, I know this story sounds weird, but I'm telling the truth. I know it can be hard to take someone's word and trust them. I understand that a lot. But this was one creepy encounter I faced, and I'm glad I wasn't alone. If my friend wasn't there with me, I'm sure that I'd be dead, in a ditch, or worse. Trafficking does happen often in my area, and I know that it happens in a lot of places. It's unfortunate. This happened to me just earlier tonight, after I got off work from McDonald's. I was sitting in the lobby enjoying a much-needed post-work meal, when suddenly a young, I would guess mid-20s man sitting at the table across from me looked directly at me and piped up. "I don't think you know me, but I know you." So, naturally, I'm extremely taken aback and wondering what the heck this man is on about, and just give him a bewildered look, hoping that he'll explain himself. Noticing my confusion, he asked me, "You work at Walmart, right?" Walmart is indeed my other workplace apart from McDonald's, so now things started making sense. "Oh, yeah, I work both here and there," I replied. He then just nodded and smiled before remarking, "I thought so. You gave me the best customer service ever. I know you probably don't remember all the customers you get, but I remember you. You're really smart. You know all the ifs, ands, and buts of the place. They should give you a promotion." "Well, thank you very much. I'm glad I was able to provide you with such great customer service, and I'm glad that you found me so memorable." I felt the tone was light-hearted enough by this point that I could playfully call out his clumsy wording before, so I then remarked, "But did you have to open up the way that you did? I don't know you, but you know me? Pal, that was the creepiest possible thing you could have said. Like, it reminded me of a line from a stalker film." He laughed at himself along with me and apologized for his poor word choice, and we started making small talk for a few minutes. Now, if the encounter had ended there, I would be regarding it as more wholesome than creepy, but no such luck. I noticed that during my conversation with him, a woman about his age who was seated at the table with him, and who I presumed to be his girlfriend, kept interjecting angry remarks at him. She would call him effing stupid, tell him to shut up, and similar remarks. It happened several times. The first few times, he and I both tried to ignore her, but after that, he just looked at me awkwardly and said, "She's mad. I don't know why." I just chuckled back at him with equal awkwardness and shrugged. Finally, she'd had enough. She leapt up from her seat, stomped over to him, grabbed his wrist, and hissed, "Get in the car, now!" He sighed and gave in to her. He said his goodbyes to me as she basically dragged him out the door. Thinking all of that was over and that they had left, I just shook my head and went back to my meal. But mere moments later, both of them stormed back in and started arguing very loudly and profanely with one another in front of the whole restaurant. They physically grabbed each other's upper arms and just started repeatedly yelling insults and vulgarities in each other's face. Obviously, this was very much to the point of disturbing the peace, so my manager firmly told them to leave the building immediately. This caused them to turn around and start cussing out my coworkers in retaliation. So, a whole group of them banded together to literally chase the two out the door, with my manager exclaiming that she was going to call the cops. This scared them off enough that they got in their vehicle and sped off. My manager still followed through on calling the cops, though, and a few minutes later an officer was outside speaking with her. My other coworkers had gone back to their duties by this time, so I quickly finished up my food and started heading out. I wondered if the cop was going to want to talk to me too, but he seemed content to just continue speaking with my manager. So, I continued making my way across the parking lots to Walgreens, where I had been planning to stop on my way home. While out there, I encountered an older couple who had witnessed the two troublemakers drive off angrily, and the husband told me that whoever was driving the vehicle backed it up into the curb so hard that the bumper had fallen off. I in turn explained to them what had happened before that. It was a lover's spat that very quickly turned into a disturbance of the peace. They asked me if anyone had gotten hurt, and I said thankfully not. We exchanged a few more words about the incident, and a bit of friendly conversation, before cordially parting ways. Both my time at Walgreens and my trip home went off without further incident. I still feel a little uneasy knowing that these clearly unstable people know where I work, and apparently find me very recognizable. But, hopefully, whatever rage they have is solely directed at each other, and not me. This happened in November of 2021. Me and a friend, both 20 female at the time, attended EDC Orlando. The first day/night was amazing. The second day there was a completely different vibe. Tons of people there looking like they just came to party because they heard about the event. That night while leaving was terrifying, as there were tons of creepy men catcalling us on the way to the shuttles. We had bought a ticket for a home base after party that also had a shuttle pass. On the way to the shuttles, we were asking all the people checking shuttle tickets which one we were to go to, and they kept saying all the way down to the right. We got to the last one and they said the same thing. We continued to walk down and there were a bunch more sketchy looking shuttles with signs saying home base unofficial shuttles, followed by more sketchy men trying to get us on. We kept walking and found a long line for a shuttle with people saying it was going to home base. As we get to the doors of the shuttle, there was a man with a bulletproof vest and walkie-talkies. My friend asks him what unofficial shuttles meant, and he said it was just because home base wasn't actually linked with EDC. He tried to scan our passes, and it didn't go through, and he talked to someone through his walkie-talkie, and they decided to let us on. Mind you, we are rolling at this time, but I'm still very aware of my surroundings and was uncomfortable getting on to the shuttle based on everything we went through to get there. The shuttle was supposed to take us to Wyndham Resorts. On the way there, I was paying attention to every street sign and looking at everyone else seemingly high out of their minds and sleepy from the long day that we had just had. We arrive at a Best Western hotel, and everyone gets off, including me and my friend. We begin to walk, not knowing where we're supposed to go, and the entire hotel seems empty and ghost town-like, with a seemingly homemade home base sign. We turn around and see absolutely no one from the shuttle that just came off with us. We see a man coming from the back dark parking lot walking towards us. We turn around again and see two men walking towards us as well. We decide to just stand there and wait to ask them a question about where we're supposed to go, but as all three approached where we were, they shook hands and said, "Oh, what's up, bro? How you been?" staring at us the entire time. That interaction scared us, as we felt that they didn't really know each other and were trying to get us, so we just extremely fast walked to the parking lot and came right out at a drive where it was fully lit. We got an Uber and went straight back to the hotel. Safe to say, the next day we went sober. I'll try to tell my story clearly, as I'm not that good typing very long posts, so bear with me here, since I am new. This story happened somewhere at the second semester in high school, and I was waiting for the public bus to take to go home, since I didn't want to be cramped in a school bus with the narrow passageway any longer, and neither of my family members could pick me up most of the time, but there were some days that only my dad picked me up from school. A Hispanic guy comes over to me as I'm waiting for the public bus and starts a conversation with me. Also, side note, I am also Hispanic like he was. He tells me that he's a senior, he's in the JROTC, and he told me his nationality, but I don't quite remember. I told him about myself in return, but not too much, including that I was actually 16 after he asked me about my age. I just simply told him that. He seemed surprised, and he straight up told me that he thought I was 13. Also, note that I was a freshman back then. I would occasionally get comments that I look physically younger, despite my actual age, so I merely brushed it aside, but he seemed interested in me despite the fact that I was a minor, and I'm very sure that he was either 18 or 19. I ended up exchanging my Kik username a few days later, due to me assuming that he was just being nice. He was part of my then boyfriend's, now ex's, friend group. He would spam me emojis all the time from that app, and that got annoying, obviously. I told him off about that, but I stupidly ended up playing along with it thinking he was still playful towards me. I remember that I looked at him while sitting in the public bus, and he motioned for me to sit next to him, but I didn't want to. Again, I stupidly accepted the invitation thinking that he just wanted my company as a friend, and when he wanted more than just that. He once put his hand on my waist, held me close to him, and called me chula. For those who aren't Hispanic or Spanish-speaking, it's Spanish slang meaning cute. Before I got off the public bus to make my way home on foot, since the bus stop is at the front of a middle school at an intersection. At this point, I should have told my then boyfriend, but I was too embarrassed, too scared, and too ashamed to even do so, which was so idiotic of me. The Hispanic senior guy even told me that he knew where I lived, but I didn't take that seriously, since it was clearly impossible to tell which apartment complex number I lived in. But I'm thinking now that he was referring to the apartment complex behind the middle school, which I still live there currently. I should have at least taken that seriously, but me being a dumb teenage girl yet again for the third time, I doubted him. Then there was the time that he told me he wanted me to be his wife, which completely caught me off guard. And I was too stunned to reply back, but mind you, we had just met, and we hardly knew each other. That's a big red flag right there. I think I remember that I said no, and was uncomfortable with what he said. He said it so bold and in an assertive manner. The last straw was when he insisted me to go attend some sort of JROTC graduation ceremony rehearsal, since it was the end of the school year despite me saying no multiple times. But he wouldn't get the hints. I angrily told him off and finally blocked him on the Kik app. I never saw him again afterwards. My only regret was not telling my then boyfriend, or anyone at that matter, of what he was doing. But someday I'll see my ex-boyfriend in the future and tell him, just not right now. I lost contact with him and I don't know his social media or his whereabouts. Also, I forgot to mention that sometime after I blocked him, I unblocked him just out of curiosity to see what he sent. As soon as I did, I was bombarded with over 10 different text messages of him desperately trying to reach out to me. I never replied back, and I blocked him again. This is a story that I've told to very few people because I know that no one would believe me. When I was 6 years old, my mother worked as a cleaning lady for a dying old woman who was a bit scary. She had hired 2 cleaning women, so my mother worked with another woman who also had a son. I got along relatively well with this other child, however, he was sometimes quite strange. And in fact, the old woman really didn't like children, and I remember her asking us to be good, otherwise she would call a monster. The monster was obviously just a model on her balcony. But the other child seemed completely terrified, and I remember that I spent a lot of time winnowing at him, calling him a sissy. He told me weird stories, like the appearance of the monster at night. They were just classic kid stories. It was then that one day the dying old woman told our mothers that she no longer wanted us to come over because we were rather turbulent. My mother was initially annoyed, but decided instead to call on the son of a friend of hers who was unemployed to look after us. And this is where the strange stories began. The guy who watched us was called Kareem. He was between 18 and 20, but I remember him as a guy who traumatized me. His goal was clearly to scare us. However, he didn't do it the classic way. In fact, he was doing terrifying things that, even today, I couldn't explain. First of all, he often told us about a dog, which he said was very naughty. I remember that the other child wanted to see this dog at all costs, so one day, after our mothers left, leaving us in the care of Kareem, he asked us to go to the kitchen. I remember being very hesitant to follow them. They called me a coward, and I ended up following. And that's when he opened the fridge. However, we were in a blind spot so as to not see the inside. I heard a very strange noise, like something eating, and then he took out his bloody hands. Today I think it's perfectly explainable that it was just a bad joke. As a kid, I was just gullible, and Kareem was that kind of person. And when I told my mother all of this, she seemed to ignore it. It was then that one evening my mother invited the mother of the other child and Kareem to my house. That night, I had planned with the other child not to sleep, so we decided to just disturb our mothers and Kareem. We made noises, we fired projectiles with toy guns, and that's where I saw him. A super tall man came from the corridor and looked at us in our room. We shouted, and the man did too, and then he ran and disappeared. My mother heard us and had come to reassure us, and we ended up sleeping in my mother's room that night. There was a closet in the hallway, and I don't know why, I had always linked this closet to this strange man. Anyway, even today I don't really know what happened. It was probably a joke by Kareem, but how is that possible? Kareem was in the living room with our mothers, and above all, only me and the other child had seen this thing. I typically don't just tell this story in general, as it seems too far-fetched and false. However, I know very well what I saw. It wasn't a dream or anything, it was real, since I had seen the same thing with the boy and my mother had reassured me that night. I would like to have your opinions on this story. Tell me what you think and help me to lend less importance to this thing that happened to me. Also, I don't think that it's a paranormal thing or something, and that's why I'm posting it here. This man was probably real, and I absolutely don't know what the hell it was. I was dog sitting when I got home every day around 2:30 p.m., and I would take her out for a fairly long walk. I do think it's important to note that we took the same route at the same time every day. Other important notes: it is winter in Canada, so it's pretty cold, and there were not a large amount of people around. Mostly just other people walking their dogs, but also a few people on their way somewhere or walking for exercise or whatever. It was not standing around hanging outside kind of weather. And she's a small dog who is extremely friendly and would offer zero protection against the attack of two men. And we took this walk through the park, which is really just a trail near my house. And while it's kind of isolated for the most part, you're within shouting distance of houses. However, there is an optional section of the path which leads to a more secluded area. Imagine the path as a straight line, and this section is a semicircle that connects to it on both ends. Quite literally a detour. And while I am a naturally anxious and paranoid person, the dog really enjoyed this part of the walk. I'm assuming because she could smell animals or wildlife. Rabbits and deer mostly. And also it's mostly taken by people with dogs. And you know how much dogs love to mark their territory over places other dogs before them have done so. One day, while we're walking this section of the path, a man in a very distinctive blue jacket appears, and while he gives me bad vibes, there is no interaction between us. And he's headed in the opposite direction, so it's fairly unremarkable. I've never seen this man before. The very next day, while we're headed to that area of the path, another man in a silver jacket passes us, but also is moving slower than normal. Because I have a dog, we stop every few feet to investigate, and are not moving at a regular pace. However, this man stays close enough that he remains in my line of sight until he arrives at the bridge. The bridge is pretty much at the entrance of this detour. At the bridge, he stops and is just kind of waiting there. I think he was also on his phone, though I'm not sure. This man also gives me that awful gut feeling, but I'm assuming that he's just waiting for someone, and I try not to worry about it. Weirdly, as we approach the bridge, he turns and starts walking back towards us. I'm feeling creeped the hell out, and also dealing with some nausea issues unrelated to this, so we don't take the detour that day, because I just want to be lying down at home as soon as possible. As we continue on, I glance back and the man in the silver jacket is back on the bridge waiting, so I don't really know what the whole seeming like he was going to head back as we went across the bridge was, but whatever. As we're continuing on our way, we run into that man in the blue jacket again. I've never seen this guy before, and now here he is 2 days in a row at the same time. He was looking at / using his phone while walking. Anyway, we just keep moving and he's headed towards the man on the bridge. This pretty much concludes the first interaction with these men, and really it's easy to explain it all away as me being overly paranoid and them being normal people, not out looking to hurt or assault someone. I continue to walk the dog at the same time every day. However, we now always skip the detour just to make me feel safer, and we don't see the man in the blue coat again. However, a week or so later, maybe longer, maybe less, I'm not really good with time, but at least several days, the dog and I are on our usual walk. As we approach the bridge, who should appear but the man in the silver jacket? Again, just kind of waiting by the bridge. He appears from off the side of the path, and quite frankly, I straight up turn around and head back the way we came. Shortly before the bridge, the path has an offshoot that leads up behind my house, and so we head that way instead. This is probably fairly obvious to the man in the silver jacket, as we had passed that offshoot, and when we see him, we straight up just turn around. This day, the weather was objectively not good. It was really cold and also snowing, so there were even fewer people around than is typical, and I wasn't willing to risk it. I firmly live by the motto, you only have to be wrong once to end up dead. And as such, I have no problem screwing politeness, which has maybe saved my hide a few times. Or I could simply be overly paranoid. Edit. I just went back and listened to my video where I mentioned the first encounter, and I was wrong here. Blue Jacket Guy was definitely on his phone. Silver Jacket Guy may have been, but I can't be sure. It's weird how unreliable memories can be sometimes. I mean, it's a small detail that doesn't actually really change anything about the story, but I do want this to be as accurate as possible. This is my first time posting on Reddit, but I was eager to share my creepy encounter. In about 2007, I had turned 13, and my parents began letting me watch my younger two brothers, ages 10 and 8 at the time. We were allowed to play outside in the backyard, but had a long driveway that extended to the front gate, facing the street that we often used to race each other on toy cars, sitting on skateboards, etc. Our street is on a cul-de-sac with our house closer to the dead end, so most traffic that came down the street was recognizable. One midweek summer afternoon, we were racing up and down the driveway, with the closed front gate, when I noticed a 6-foot-tall white man with black sunglasses slowly driving by and sticking his head out the window to stare at us with a large grin. My first thought was that he was a relative, that I just didn't recognize because he looked happy to see us. But then as he drove back around, my instincts started to freak out, because his car was slowing down, and I realized I didn't actually know this man. I quickly told my younger brothers to go inside, and we all went through the back door, which I quickly locked. Then we all stood quiet and hid. I peeked out from our large front windows that were only protected by white curtains, and the man had parked his car across the street and was standing by his car, looking back and forth up and down the street. Don't judge me, but I remember feeling bad for him because he looked lost, or like his car had just broken down. My middle brother was also peeking out the window with me as we told our youngest to just stay in the opposite side of the house, but to keep the TV off and stay silent. He stood there for about 5 minutes, just moving things around in his back seat and trunk. But my sympathy turned into fear when the man started walking from across the street towards our house. I quickly went to the entryway, and we laid on the floor hoping that he couldn't see us at low level through the curtain. He rang the doorbell 3 times and kept trying to look in. I remember feeling frozen, but still being naive and debating if I should just see if he was okay or find out what he wanted. He said, "Hello? Hello?" and looked really frustrated, which kept on making me feel bad for him. He rang the doorbell 3 more times, stood there, and finally just left. He was dressed in a nice dress shirt and pants and didn't look homeless or anything, which is why I kept thinking that his car malfunctioned. But as soon as my parents came home that night and we told them what happened, they put locks on the gate and added a security camera. I think what scares me the most as an adult now is how close I was to just opening the door for him and the endless possibilities of what could have been. Had he been watching our house before and seen 3 young boys? Did he just need car help? And this was right before cell phones were everywhere. I never saw this person ever again, so I doubt it was a relative. And I grew up in a suburb where the entire cul-de-sac was Asian or Hispanic in descent, so this man stood out. But it still freaks me out to think about. mostly how excited he smiled when he first saw us. Anyways, I just wanted to share my story. So that was today's collection of creepy encounter stories, stalker stories, stranger stories, however you want to look at it. Stories where the scariest thing is the person sitting right next to you. And you know what? They are creepy. These stories are scary. They're supposed to be terrifying, but also potentially educational, as I always say. If anyone can listen to these and then potentially see themselves in a situation like this and maybe find a way out or avoid it altogether, then they've done their job. If not, well then, I guess they're just entertainment and scary stories that we get to share on the internet. If you enjoyed this collection of stories, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. If you are new to the channel and liked what you heard, welcome. I'm happy to have you here. Please consider subscribing. And, of course, if you are feeling ever so bold, you can leave me a comment down below telling me how you're doing. How you feeling? What'd you think of these stories? What'd you think of my voice? Guess what? It's mostly here again. It's improving daily. Not perfect. I am still having issues where it's frying out every once in a while, but it's not anywhere near as bad. So, progress. There's also the extra stuff you can do, such as the super thanks down below, joining the channel memberships, or Patreon, where you get early access to content like this, as far as I can get them ahead of time. Not always days ahead of time, but typically ahead to some extent, especially on Patreon. Yeah, never expected, always appreciated. Now, all that said, friends, I hope you're having a gorgeous week. We got an extra video this week. Tomorrow, actually. There will be... See, my voice just fried a little bit. There will be an extra video this week, and it will be tomorrow. It'll be a paranormal video, so if you're into that, look forward to it. If not, that's fine, I understand. Yeah. But anyways, friends, I hope you have a great day. I hope to see you soon. And until I do see you again, remember you are loved, you are important, you are valid. You're the best you that you can be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. I think so. Tyler thinks so. He just jumped up here. Yeah. Anyways. Until I see you again, friends. Sorry, he confused me and got me all off track. Until I see you again, much love, and sleep well.
This happened back in the 1990s, long after the time babysitting became a common theme for scary movies. Personally, I didn't really watch things like that, so I wasn't really afraid that any of those far-fetched stories would ever happen to me. I was 17 years old, and every Friday night I would babysit for the Wilson family down the street. They were a relatively young, yuppie-ish couple who went to parties every Friday, and needed someone to babysit overnight for their 2 kids. I'm not exactly sure what kind of parties they attended, but they were typically out all night, and wouldn't get back until 3, 4, sometimes maybe even 5 in the morning. It wasn't much of an imposition or concern for me though, because they paid me quite well, and I liked the kids too. A whole lot, in fact. The children in question were an 11-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. They had a pretty typical relationship for children about that age. The boy, though the mother was not very happy about it, loved to watch scary movies and read comics. He was always trying to scare his little sister, especially when his parents weren't around. I had an older brother too, so I knew what that was like. The boy would sometimes try and scare me too, but that never succeeded. On this particular Friday, it was mid-fall and quite cold outside. As usual, I got to their house around 6 p.m. The parents went through their list of rules that I had already memorized. They told me they would like me to prepare dinner and gave me a recipe. They also gave me the exact same approximate return time they gave me every week. It was alright. Well, after we'd all had a wonderful dinner, they were a relatively wealthy couple and always had lots of good food around. We all sat down to watch a movie on TV. About halfway through the film, the boy Chris got up and left to go to the bathroom upstairs. When he came back, he plopped himself down on the couch and just kept watching the movie. When the movie was on its last commercial break, Julie got up and it was obvious she had to go to the bathroom too. "Don't go into the bathroom, you'll just get scared," Chris said in a sing-song and mockingly scary voice. "Stop it," Julie cried in the typical "quit scaring me" whine that was indicative of little girls who were tired of their big brothers always trying to scare them. Chris smiled wickedly. "I mean it. There's a clown hiding behind that shower curtain. And you'll see it if you just sit on the toilet." Chris finished by making some unfriendly, spooky sounds in an attempt to further frighten his sister. "Make him stop," Julie whined, looking over at me. She obviously had to pee really bad. She began dancing there in her PJs, trying hard to hold herself in. "Stop scaring your sister," I told Chris and playfully threw a small couch cushion at him. He laughed and hid his face behind it. Julie looked over at me, and her eyes asked me the question I didn't need to hear. "Yes, I'll come with you." I got up and took Julie by the hand and led her over to the bathroom door. She refused to touch the knob first. Julie insisted I open the door and switch on the light. "Can you check the curtain?" she asked me slowly. I walked over to the opaque blue curtain. I have to admit that for some reason, I was slightly apprehensive. Must have been that lingering fear everybody had about showers from much of the movie Psycho. I slowly put my hand on it and paused for just a moment. I opened the shower curtain. Of course, it was empty. "Will you wait outside the door?" Julie asked. I of course agreed. When she was done, she had me come in while she flushed the toilet. We both washed our hands and went back to the movie. Now the rest of the night went by quietly enough. Chris had obviously had his fun and must have decided he didn't want to try scaring Julie any longer. Either that or he had scared himself too by watching all those movies, which sometimes happened. By 10 o'clock, both kids were in bed and had been asleep for at least an hour. I also went to bed around 10:30, so I would sleep in the Wilsons' extra room until they got home. I got ready for bed and went into the spare room. I've never been the best sleeper in the world. I always like to know what time it is, and I would always wake up every hour or so and look over the clock in this room. They had a large digital clock with red numbers on it, so I could wake up and turn around to see the clock easily, then go right back to sleep. I must have fallen into a deeper sleep at some point. The last time I remember seeing on the clock, it was about 11. I woke up at 11:45. I saw the light of the clock and turned over and fell back asleep. Later on, I was suddenly woken out of my sleep by a sound. I looked at the clock and saw it was 12:30. I heard Julie's voice. "Can I sleep here? I think there's a monster outside my window." I was groggy, but of course I had no problem with her sleeping in my room. Chris had scared her earlier, and it made sense that she probably was seeing or hearing things. Besides, having her sleep in my room with me would be a lot easier than getting up to check on her every now and then, just to make sure she was safe. She crawled in bed with me, and I looked over at the clock. It was still 12:30. I fell asleep. I was woken up by another noise. Looking at the clock, it was 1:08 a.m. I heard Chris's voice this time. "I'm sorry for scaring Julie earlier. Can I sleep in here with you? I think there's a monster outside my window." Although I was exhausted, I chuckled to myself as I mentioned my brother used to try and scare me when I was younger too. I always wished that my brother would have ended up scaring himself, and although it was unlikely, I never stopped wishing it would happen occasionally. Chris was a lot nicer than my brother was though, so I agreed and let him climb into bed too. He was still a boy, and it was unlikely he learned his lesson so fast, but I didn't want to be unnecessarily mean to him. I looked at the clock. This time it said 1:12. I drifted off again. I woke up a bit later this time. The clock said 2:39. I was happy I'd actually been able to sleep for more than an hour without waking up. I looked over at the kids. They were sleeping just fine, so I went back to sleep. The next time I woke up, though, something very odd happened. I first thought I must have rolled over or something, because I didn't see the clock. Being very obsessive about my ritual, I knew I had to roll over and look at the clock before falling asleep again. After my head cleared just a little bit, I realized I was facing the direction of the clock, but the clock just wasn't there. I groaned, realizing that we must be having a power outage or something. I would never be able to get back to sleep if I didn't know what time it was. Right after I groaned, though, a black shadow moved and the clock became visible. It said 3:24 a.m. It only took me a moment for me to realize I hadn't seen the clock because somebody was standing in front of it. I screamed before I realized this was a dumb thing to do. I woke up both kids who panicked. "Get out of the house," I yelled at them as I saw a shadow coming towards us. It didn't take the kids more than a few seconds to know something was wrong. Julie and Chris started screaming it was the monster. They both jumped up and ran like hell. I tried to follow them, but I wasn't fast enough. Whoever was in that room got a hold of me. I tried screaming, but he shoved his hand over my mouth. Trying to think of what I could do, I tried to stomp on his foot. Although he yelped in pain, it only made him hold on tighter. He was way too strong, and I was not getting away. I tried to console myself and tell myself that the police would come. The kids had gotten away. I kept struggling, and he threw me towards the bed. I didn't hit it, though. I fell and hit the floor. My arm hit the metal frame of the bed, and I heard it crack. The man came towards me quickly, and I started crying as he grabbed me by my arm. I prepared for the worst when I heard a gunshot. I cringed. Then I noticed the man scream in pain. He fell on me. However, he didn't remain on me very long. He rolled over onto his side and grabbed his arm. Looking up, I saw the best thing I had ever seen in my life. Apparently, the father of the kids had gotten home in that time and retrieved his gun from his own bedroom, a gun I didn't even know he had. I felt a new rush of energy as I jumped up and ran past him. I ushered both kids out of the room and down the stairway and out of the house. They ran to the neighbors who had been awakened by the gunshot. They had already called the police. They came and found the man being held at gunpoint by the father. They arrested him. It turned out the man had been trying to abduct children in the area. Both kids had already been scared because of the stories they'd been hearing. They'd been sleeping very lightly and were woken by the man trying to get into the house. They assumed he was a monster trying to get in. When they'd heard the noises, they hadn't really seen anything. Apparently, he was trying not to wake me up so he could take the kids easily. He, in fact, had been in the room with us, trying to pick the right moment to grab them. He was cautious because he had seen me waking up every half hour or so, looking at the clock. That kept him from acting sooner, and it probably saved those kids too. After talking to the police, the scariest part was they told me once I had woken up, he wasn't intending to abduct me. He just wanted me out of the way. Since he'd begun attacking me, I assumed that meant he was going to kill me. I still sleep with a digital clock in my room. I can't sleep with that one whenever there's a power outage, though. When I wake up and don't see the number, I assume the worst and start screaming. It's terrible what some sick fucker will do to screw you up for the rest of your life. When I was in high school, I began babysitting for the family of my best friend. She had one brother and one sister, 5 and 7 years old respectively. I was a year behind my friend in school. She had left to go to college and could no longer watch over the siblings. Since the family knew me very well, they hired me as the babysitter. They were both really nice parents and rather wealthy. They owned a big and beautiful townhouse as well. Well, one Friday night, the parents had a party that they had to go to. I showed up at 7 p.m. on the dot. They told me they didn't expect to be back until very late, as usual. This was like an opportunity being paid to enjoy myself. The children were so young that they were usually in bed by 8:30 and asleep by 9. I had the rest of the hours to myself, to talk on the phone, watch television, and basically do whatever I wanted, as long as I checked on the kids. On this particular night, I had been talking to another friend of mine, Steph, for a while. She had to be in bed early since she was a cheerleader, and the team had an away game the following afternoon. She had to get up to be on the bus by the time 10 o'clock rolled around. I resigned myself to an evening of watching cable television and eating junk food after fixing myself a sundae covered with nuts and hot fudge, and even a few pieces of banana I was able to chop up. I sat down in front of the television and made myself comfortable. Flipping on the TV, there was this strange repair show. There was a guy and he was mixing concrete and what looked to be a wheelbarrow. Beside the wheelbarrow, he had a bunch of cinder blocks stacked up behind him. It looked like he was making some sort of wall. I couldn't really care less about that sort of thing, so I changed the channel. Only, when I changed the channel, the same show was on the second channel as well. I get the cable can sometimes be like that though, so irritated, I flipped the channel again, only for the same show to be on the other channel. I kept flipping it over and over and over again, and each time I flipped the channel, it stayed on that show. The man never missed a beat. He was mixing the mortar and lining up the bricks. I really didn't know what was going on. I was wondering if there was some strange issue with the cable or something. The man looked directly at the screen, and I felt as if he were looking straight at me. That was not nearly as scary though, as when he addressed me by name. "Cindy, I think you need to come downstairs right away." Fear flowed through my body, like I cannot explain. Although I didn't know how to react, I knew I was not going to go downstairs. There would definitely be something going on down there. I started fumbling for my cell phone so I could call the police. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Cindy. You won't have time," the man told me. I watched as he pulled the 7-year-old boy I was babysitting in front of the camera. He started patting the boy on the head and said, "I suggest you get down here real quick." Not knowing what to do, I immediately felt protective of the boy. I began toward the basement door. I stopped though because I was in the room with the fireplace. I grabbed a poker and went to the basement door. I flung it open and flipped on the light. After a moment's hesitation, I ran down the stairs. It was an unfinished basement, as I knew beforehand. There was a pile of cinder blocks down there and a barrel with mortar, but there was not a single person there. I felt like my heart was trying to escape my chest and push its way up my throat, out my mouth. Somehow, though, I managed to calm down. That's when I realized that whatever I'd seen on the television must not have been live. It must have been recorded or something. There was probably nobody in the house. Unnerved, but not nearly as afraid as I had been before, I still held the poker, making my way back up the steps. I closed the basement door behind me. I have to admit I did not turn off the light behind me. I walked over to examine the television. Looking behind it, I found somebody had connected the computer to it. The video had ended, so I turned the television off. I honestly began thinking this was just a prank. Maybe my friend that went off to college set this up. She'd likely taped the video with a friend and her brother and set me up to scare. I chuckled about it, realizing it was indeed a pretty good joke. I had played some pretty good jokes in my life on her, so I couldn't really be mad. I appreciated a good laugh too, even though I was not laughing when it initially happened. Still though, on the off chance that something really wrong was going on, I figured I should give the house a once-over first. Foremost, I checked the kids' rooms to make sure they were safe. Both of them were sleeping soundly in their bed. I checked under their beds, in their closets, behind any furniture. Then I went in and thoroughly inspected the parents' room. There was nothing. After checking the kitchen, the den, all the other rooms, I was completely convinced my friend had just played a really bad prank on me. I figured I was going to text her and tell her that she got me good with that one. I rechecked the front door, still a bit frightened to see if it was locked. It was. Lastly, I walked out to the coat closet by the front door to check that out. I opened the closet door as quickly as I could and scanned the floor while pushing the coat and clothes aside so I could see if anybody had been hiding behind them. Turns out no one was standing hiding behind the clothing, so I was pretty happy. I sighed with relief and looked up on the shelf. Then I heard the voice from the video. My first reaction was to freeze. I looked up at the high shelf in the closet and saw the person from the video laying on the shelf, his body stretched out, his hand resting on a crooked arm, and a wicked smile crossing his face. It was horrifying that I hadn't thought to look up there, and to also know that not only was he watching me as I searched, he could have grabbed me at any moment. His smile widened, and then he whispered to me, "I'm gonna get you." He moved quickly, jumping off the shelf. Fortunately, although he was fast, he was still on a shelf. I had a bit of a head start too. It wasn't much though, and I didn't even make it to the door before I felt his hand grab my hair and my head jerked back. I fell back and hit my head on something, and everything went completely black. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed. It took me a while to get my bearings, and a while for my wits to come back to me. Fortunately, before I had a chance to freak out too much, my mom came into the room to talk to me and calm me down. Apparently, at some point after I'd been attacked, the little girl had gotten up and was looking for me. When she couldn't find me, she woke her brother up. He was older and was smart enough to immediately call the police, and the police came over to investigate. Unfortunately, the man and his laptop were gone. Fortunately, the kids weren't harmed. Even more fortunately, the man was easily identified as the contractor the family had hired to face the basement for them. That's why the boy had willingly made the video with him. The boy had also told him about me, his babysitter. That's how he knew to set everything up. Unfortunately, the man had already fled his home and was not found by the police in the end. The police said they'd found me in the basement tied up to a kitchen chair. The man had cinder blocks and mortar prepared and had tried to build a little wall around me. Pre-warning, this will be a short story because I have some details left out to ensure it's left anonymous. When I was around 15, I started babysitting a family with 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl. Their mom knew me, as the oldest was friends with my little brother, and had asked my mom if I could help out just because she had started taking on more shifts, and her husband was also doing the same. They lived right next to my high school and paid well, so I agreed, despite not really having that much experience. Pretty quickly, I realized this was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was just nervous around them. The oldest was fine, just played on his Xbox most of the time, or did homework. But the 2 youngest were a different story. The middle child, their daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies, and on more than one occasion, I had to hide the knives from her since she wanted to reenact the scenes. The youngest son had tried to set fire to the Christmas tree. I know what kids can be like since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones just drove me insane. I had to constantly worry about them hurting themselves or each other. If they acted up too much, I would threaten to call their mom, which would normally work. After a few months though, I realized that if I just mentioned the dad, they would immediately behave and do everything I asked, so that's what I started doing. Now, I had never really met this dad. I just knew that the guy was a really tall guy and a really big build. He was always described to me as still being really nice though, so I never really thought about it. On this particular occasion, I had said to the youngest boy that I would call his dad if he didn't stop misbehaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum, so I ended up calling him and explaining. Luckily for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said he would get home as quick as he could and apologize for the children's behavior. When I explained I had done this, the kid sobbed and ended up locking himself in his room. That day, the dad got home, and they were not joking when they said he was tall. I'm only 5'3" and was 15. When I saw him having to crouch a little to even get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking, oh shit, no wonder the kids won't misbehave when he's there. I said hi and apologized for the work call, which he just brushed off and said that it needed to be done and not to worry. We were both sat on the couch. I can't really remember why, but I think we were talking about what days they needed me for. Now at this stage, the two youngest had went outside to play, while I was with the oldest. I had just been tidying a little from dinner. I was pretty weirded out because this oldest started to get pretty antsy when asked to go to the shop. He kept making excuses to his dad, so I just offered to go instead. I could see the dad visibly frustrated, and I just wanted to diffuse the situation. I would like to reiterate that everything seemed normal up to this point. I remember feeling really intimidated by the dad though. I had only met him this one time and spoken to him for no more than 20 minutes. It turned out the oldest had said to his mom that he didn't want me left alone with his dad, as he had apparently been watching me a little too closely during our encounter. The parents asked me to babysit later on that week, which I agreed to. However, in the space of just a few days, that quickly changed. I got a text from the mom apologizing for the last-minute arrangements, but saying I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I had changed plans around, but I wasn't too bothered. I just said it was fine and to let me know when she did need me. She asked me to come around to get my pay for the last 2 weeks, and I decided to nip that before going home. Immediately, as soon as I entered the house, I could tell something was wrong. Not wanting to pry, I just went in to say hi, talk about the books for a little bit, and then left. It wasn't until the next week, I think, or maybe the week after that where everything kicked off. I came home to my mom being very upset and angry, pacing in the living room, while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately went to ask her what was wrong, feeling a little bit worried. Instantly, she threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I had meant to be babysitting, but again got canceled on, so I was home earlier than what I had said originally. Pulling away confused, I asked her what was wrong again. Turns out my mom had been trying to get a hold of me for a while, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit, but nobody was home, so I decided to head back on the bus. I wasn't able to let my mom know though. She sat me down and started asking me all these questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I had mentioned that I'd only met him once and only really spoken to him on the phone a handful of times when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mom started pressing on and asked if anything else had happened. She kept questioning me and saying I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused. I told her nothing had happened and asked what exactly all this was about. I always remember this. Her taking a really deep breath and saying, "Oh, thank God," before letting me know what happened. Now, as I said, the details are vague because this was on the news. Turns out the guy had killed someone while working and had been taken in by the police. During the interrogation, it turns out he admitted to beating his wife, and there were speculations of assaults as well. There was also mention that one of his types were petite girls that had dark hair, pale, which happened to match my description at the time. My mom was terrified something had happened to me. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me the shivers. I remember feeling like I was going to throw up and a sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom held me close crying because she had been worried sick all day and scared something had happened to me. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for the family right there and then. I felt so awful for the wife though. She was honestly one of the nicest people I'd ever met. About a week later, I got a text from her. As it turns out, I had left behind some books, so I said I would go and grab them. When I saw her, my heart sank. She had obviously not slept in a long time and was putting on a brave face for the kids, who couldn't tell what was going on. We ended up sitting in the kitchen and I gave her a big hug just trying to comfort her. I mentioned that if she needed help with the kids since he was gone, I would try and help. She immediately refused, as it turns out people had started attacking their home. She gave me my stuff, paid for the wages with a little more added. I had completely forgotten about this, and said she really appreciated it, but thought it would be a better idea if I just took a step back from the family, as she didn't want me getting hurt for just being associated with them. To this day, I still think about them, and it scares me after thinking about what could have happened. I still talk to the younger kids who are a lot older now, and even help tutor the younger girl. I helped the oldest when he was starting high school, because I noticed kids bullying him for what his dad had done. It was awful considering it didn't involve any of the rest of the family. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I would also like to give a special shout out to my friend Killer Orange Cat, who is also a narrator here on YouTube that reads true scary stories. He has allowed me permission to use stories submitted to him in his subreddit in my videos. So if you like these stories, please be sure to go check him out, as he is a very good narrator as well, and he puts out content every week. If you guys enjoyed my narrating style and the content of this particular video, please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you do decide to subscribe, make sure to hit that bell button and turn notifications to all if you would like to be notified of every video I post in the future, although I post a video every day when I can, so if you just come back to the channel every so often, you'll not have missed very much. If you guys would like to get in contact with me for any reason, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. You will find links to all of my social media, including my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I will try to read them as soon as possible. You can also send me a message on any of those to submit your own scary story experience for me to read in the video. If you do decide to submit a scary story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what the theme of the story is if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include proper grammar, and please include as much detail as you feel comfortable sharing, as that makes it much easier and more likely that it will end up in a video in the future. I also have 2 other channels if you like my voice, called Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour respectively, where I do weekly true crime vids and monthly documentaries on dark things that happen in history. If you like my voice, check them out. Maybe those contents will be for you. Overall though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.